My friend asked me to cover for her, to repeat her story if her husband ever called, and I said yes without understanding what that yes would cost me. I was standing in the women's restroom at Penn Station, staring at my own reflection, when I realized I had been lying for someone who would never do the same for me. My hands were shaking, not because I was afraid of being caught, but because for the first time in a year I admitted to myself that I felt used, quietly and completely. It started with a phone call late one night, back when my life felt smaller and more manageable. I was living in a cramped studio in Queens, working long shifts at a dental office, saving for a future that had no clear shape yet. That night, I was already in bed, half asleep, when my phone kept buzzing on the nightstand. It was Elena. She sounded breathless, like she had been running, or crying, or both. She told me she had made a mistake, then corrected herself, and said she had fallen in love, then went quiet and asked me to promise not to judge her. I remember staring at the ceiling, counting a crack that looked like a lightning bolt, and saying I wouldn't judge because that was what sisters said to each other. She called me her sister often, even though we weren't related, even though we had only known each other for 3 years. She said it made her feel safe. Elena was married. She didn't say his name at first. She didn't have to. I knew him. Everyone did. Thomas was the kind of man people trusted automatically, the kind who shook your hand firmly and looked you in the eye. He worked in finance, wore tailored coats, and talked about loyalty as if it were a personal value he had invented. When Elena finally said she was seeing someone else, my stomach tightened, but I didn't interrupt. She told me she needed help, just small things, nothing dramatic. She asked if I could say she was with me sometimes, if I could answer her phone once in a while if Thomas called while she was busy, if I could keep a few details straight so she wouldn't slip up. She kept repeating that it was temporary, that she was confused, that she just needed time to figure things out. I told her I understood, even though I didn't, because I thought loyalty meant staying quiet. The first lie felt heavy, like putting on a coat that didn't belong to me. Thomas had called, his voice calm and polite, asking if Elena was still at my place. I said yes, that we were watching something, had fallen asleep. I remember the exact lie because afterward I sat on the edge of my bed and replayed it in my head, checking for mistakes, feeling a strange mix of guilt and pride for having pulled it off. After that, it became easier. I became part of her routine without realizing when it happened. She would text me before going out, asking me to remember where she was supposed to be. Sometimes she would send screenshots of her calendar so I could keep track. She joked that I was better than any password-protected app, that I was her human firewall. I laughed with her, even when something inside me felt wrong. What she didn't say, and what I didn't ask, was who she was becoming when she wasn't with me, or with her husband. I never met the other man. I didn't want to. I told myself that knowing less made it easier, that I was just helping a friend survive a confusing time. Elena was good at making confusion sound noble. Months passed. Winter turned into a damp, gray spring. My life stayed mostly the same, but hers seemed to expand. She started wearing new clothes, more expensive ones, talking about restaurants I had never heard of, complaining about how tired she was from all the emotional labor she was doing. I listened. I always listened. When she cried, I reminded her she wasn't a bad person, just a human one. She said Thomas wouldn't understand, that he saw the world in black and white. She said I was the only one who really knew her. Hearing that made me feel important in a quiet way, like I had a role that couldn't be replaced. I didn't notice how rarely she asked about my days, how quickly she changed the subject when I tried to talk about my own problems. The shift was subtle, almost polite. She started asking for favors that had nothing to do with her affair. Could I cover a shift for her friend at work? Could I lend her some money until next month? Could I let her crash at my place for a few days because she needed space? Each request came wrapped in affection, in inside jokes, in reminders of everything we had been through together. Saying no felt like betrayal. I told myself this was what friendship looked like when it was tested. I ignored the tightness in my chest every time my phone buzzed with her name. I ignored how exhausted I felt after seeing her, how small my own life seemed next to her chaos. I was too busy being useful to notice I was being drained. The moment I started to wake up came quietly, without drama. It was a Tuesday afternoon in the office, slow and bright, when a patient mentioned Elena's name casually. She said she had seen her at a rooftop bar downtown with a man who definitely wasn't her husband. She laughed and said New York was full of surprises. I smiled back, my face stiff, my heart racing for reasons I didn't fully understand yet. That night, I replayed the past year in my head, not as individual lies, but as a pattern. I saw how often Elena needed me right before she got something she wanted, how distant she became when things were going well for her. I noticed how she never asked what keeping her secret cost me, how she assumed my silence was endless. I didn't confront her. Not then. I needed time to be sure I wasn't imagining things, that I wasn't just tired or jealous. So I watched. I paid attention to how she spoke to me when she thought she needed nothing. I noticed how quickly she grew impatient if I hesitated, how she reminded me of everything she had done for me, even when those things were vague and hard to name. The truth settled slowly, like dust after a room has been shaken. She didn't see me as a sister. She saw me as a resource, reliable and quiet. And I trained her to see me that way by never asking for anything in return. The realization didn't make me angry right away. It made me calm in a way that scared me. Calm enough to think clearly, to stop reacting and start choosing. I knew if I confronted her, she would cry, apologize, promise to change. I also knew nothing would actually change. She would just be more careful. So I did something else. I stopped correcting her lies. The next time she told Thomas she was with me, she didn't warn me first. I watched my phone ring, her name lighting up the screen, and I didn't answer. I waited. I let the call go to voicemail. A minute later, Thomas texted me, polite as always, asking if everything was okay. I stared at the message, feeling my pulse in my ears. Then I typed back something honest and simple. I said I wasn't with Elena, and I hadn't been for a while. I didn't explain. I didn't accuse. I didn't add context. I just let the truth sit there, bare and quiet. My hands stopped shaking once the message was sent. I felt lighter, like I had set something down that I had been carrying too long. Elena called me immediately. Then again. I didn't answer. I knew whatever she said would be about damage control, not understanding. I turned my phone face down and went for a walk, letting the city noise swallow my thoughts. By the time I came home, there were messages waiting, long ones, filled with anger and disbelief, then fear. She accused me of ruining her life, of betraying her, of choosing the worst possible moment to suddenly grow a conscience. Reading her words, I noticed something strange. She never asked why I did it. She never asked how I felt. She only talked about what she was losing. That was when I knew I had made the right choice. I didn't block her. I didn't respond either. I let the silence do what my voice never could. Over the next few days, fragments of information reached me through mutual friends, through quiet conversations that stopped when I entered a room. Thomas had found out more than Elena expected. The other man had disappeared quickly. Things were unraveling. I thought I would feel guilty, or satisfied, or relieved. Instead, I felt honest. For the first time in a year, my thoughts matched my actions. I wasn't carrying anyone else's story anymore. A week later, I found myself back at Penn Station, waiting for a delayed train, watching people rush past with their own secrets and small disasters. My phone buzzed once more. It was Elena. A single message. She said she never thought I would do this to her. I deleted the message without replying. Not out of cruelty, but because I finally understood something she never did. I didn't do anything to her. I stopped doing something for her. And that made all the difference. For a while, life went quiet in a way that felt unnatural. Like the silence after a storm when you keep waiting for thunder that never comes. I went to work, answered patients' questions, smiled when expected. But inside I was replaying moments I had ignored for too long. Small details returned to me with uncomfortable clarity. The way Elena's eyes flicked to her phone whenever it buzzed, the way she praised my loyalty in public, but dismissed my needs in private, the way I always felt slightly apologetic for existing around her. 2 weeks after everything unraveled, she showed up at my apartment without warning. I heard the knock and knew it was her before I looked through the peephole. My body reacted before my mind did, my shoulders tensing, my breath shallow. I considered pretending I wasn't home, but something in me was tired of hiding, even from situations I hadn't created. When I opened the door, she looked smaller than I remembered. Her hair pulled back carelessly, dark circles under her eyes. For a second, I almost felt the old instinct to comfort her, to invite her in, to let her talk until the world made sense again. Instead, I stayed where I was, one hand on the doorframe, not blocking her but not welcoming her either. She didn't apologize. She started with anger, her voice tight, controlled, as if she were afraid of losing it completely. She said I had humiliated her, that Thomas had always trusted me, that my message had made everything worse. I listened without interrupting, noticing how carefully she avoided mentioning the affair itself, as if the real crime was my refusal to keep lying. When she finally stopped talking, she looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to explain myself, to defend my choice, to soften the edges. I realized she still believed this was a conversation she controlled. That realization hurt more than her words. I told her the truth, but not the dramatic version she might have expected. I said I was tired. I said I didn't recognize myself anymore. I said I had started to feel like my only value to her was my silence. My voice stayed calm, almost distant, and that seemed to unsettle her more than anger would have. She laughed once, sharp and disbelieving, and said I was exaggerating, that everyone uses everyone sometimes, that this was how adult relationships worked. Hearing that, something final clicked into place. I understood then that she genuinely didn't see a problem with what she had done. In her mind, I was reacting incorrectly to a perfectly normal arrangement. She asked if I knew how much she had risked trusting me. I asked her if she knew how much I had risked by lying for her. The question hung between us, unanswered. She left soon after, shaking her head, muttering that she never thought I would turn into this kind of person. I closed the door gently behind her and leaned against it, not crying, just breathing, feeling the strange relief of having survived a conversation I had been afraid of for months. After that, the messages stopped. Mutual friends grew awkward, unsure which side to take, or pretending there were no sides at all. I let those connections fade without resistance. I had learned that proximity wasn't the same as closeness, and shared history didn't guarantee shared values. Thomas emailed me once. The message was short, careful, thanking me for being honest when I was. He didn't ask questions. He didn't accuse. I didn't reply. It felt important to let that boundary stand too. Some truths didn't need follow-up conversations. As weeks turned into months, I noticed changes in myself that felt both subtle and profound. I stopped checking my phone constantly. I slept better. I said no more often, without elaborate explanations. When someone asked for my help, I paused long enough to ask myself whether I actually wanted to give it. One evening, sitting alone on my fire escape, watching the city lights flicker on as the sun went down, I thought about the version of myself who had answered that first late-night call without hesitation. I didn't judge her. She had wanted to be loyal, to matter, to be chosen. What she hadn't known yet was how expensive that desire could become when offered to the wrong person. I never told my story publicly. I didn't need to. The quiet shift inside me was enough. Elena moved on, I'm sure, reshaping the narrative in ways that made sense to her. I stopped wondering what version of events she told others. That, too, was no longer my responsibility. The last time I saw her was months later, by accident, on a crowded sidewalk in Midtown. Our eyes met briefly. There was recognition, then calculation, then distance. Neither of us stopped. As she disappeared into the crowd, I felt something close to gratitude, not for what she had taken from me, but for what the experience had forced me to see. I had thought the unexpected thing I did was telling the truth. It wasn't. The unexpected thing was choosing myself quietly, without asking for permission, and without needing her to understand.